In this video, we're going to explore how to read data in to our Python program from an outside source. What we're going to be using is a text file. So, for example, this is book.txt, and I have some name of books in here. We're also going to look at how to write out data to a text file. So let's explore how that all works. So first of all, let's make sure that we understand what a text file is. A text file here, I'm just using Notepad. If you're in a Mac, you can use Text Wrangler, I think, is a editor that you can use. And basically what we're doing, and notice I'm not using Word on purpose, because Word, when you save a Word file, you have to have Word in order to open it, and it's got a lot of extra formatting in it. A text file is very plain. There's nothing else to it except just the characters you put in here. It's also like a Mac could read this text file, a PC could read this text file. It's very plain. There's not a lot of extra formatting it's human readable, so it's not saved as a binary file. And so I've just copied and pasted. I've just pasted in some, I already have in here some book names that I'm going to be using. And if you were just to put it in for the first time, you could choose File, Save, or Save As. And you can see I'm just saving it as a .txt file. So the extension is .txt as opposed to Word would be .w, what is it now? .docx. Used to be in the old days DOC, that's why I still get confused because I guess I'm kind of old. Anyway, not going there. We're saving this as a text file. So book.txt, so it's just a very simple file, no extra formatting, nothing too scary that we have to deal with. So that's my file that I'm going to read in, and I'll put this aside so we can do that. All right, so I'm using Visual Studio Code, which is just another editor. It's a little fancier editor than what we've been using in the past. We've been using idle. So the idea here is that I can be able to see everything that's in my current folder. So in my folder, I have book.txt. I've also got a blank file that I'm going to start writing my Python code in. It's kind of nice to be able to see them side by side and see what's going on in the directory, especially since we're going to be writing files to the directory. So let's get started and see how we're going to be able to read this data in. All right, so the first thing we need to do is open a stream, open a connection, get a hold of our book. And so in order to do that, I'm going to create a variable called text file equals, and we use this method called open. And open has two parameters or arguments that we need to send it. We're going to send it the name of the book. And in my case, I don't have to do anything else except just name the book, because the book and the file that I'm writing from, this file.io.py, are in the same directory. So it's going to be easy for Python to find it. It just says, look within wherever I'm currently running from. I'm currently running from this example folder, and so that's where I should find the book.txt. And then a comma. And the next quotes is going to be, in what mode do we want to read the data? In other words, this is giving me a prompt of, well, are you going to want it in R? Well, R is simply saying, I just want to read the data from the file. I'm not going to write data back to the file. I'm not going to try and edit any of the data from that file, from that book file. I'm just going to read it. That's all I want to do. So that's what this R is saying. All right, and so then now that I have a handle, or what we call an object, on that book, so I have a text file object, I have a hold on that book, I want to do something with it. So I'm going to create another variable, lines, and the idea is I'm going to read in all of those lines or books from the book file, from the book.txt file. So we use we reference that variable or object we just talked about, and I'm going to use read lines. And read lines is going to, according to my little drop down, return a list of lines from the string, I think is what it's trying to finish off with, of read lines. Okay, so that's interesting. So I'm not sure how that's going to work. I'm going to print lines when I'm done so I can see exactly what it is that got read in. So let's see what happens. I'm going to run the code from here so I can just see both the code and the output at the same time. That'll be kind of handy. And so what comes back? Well, what comes back is, does this look familiar? This looks like a list or an array, doesn't it? And I can tell that because I have these open and closed brackets. I always get brackets and braces mixed up. And then you can see that there's a string, and that string ends in a new character line, which makes sense because if we look at our book.txt file, in order to create this new line, we had to hit, backspace. I had to hit the enter key. So the enter key is a new line. I can't see it, but it's there, which is how I was able to create a new line. So there, it's pulling in that new line character as well. So we can see 3 books or 3 elements in our array. So read lines then, its job is to, sounds like it reads everything in that file and it puts it into an array or a list. All right, that's great. So now I know what that does. I'm going to comment it out because I don't want to keep printing it out. I just wanted to see what it does. Just kind of testing it piece by piece to see how things work. All right, well then if it's an array, that means I can loop through it and see each individual line. So for line in lines, in other words, every time you loop through lines, which is the array, put each of those elements into lines so I can print it out. In other words, line is going to receive a single value. Each time it loops through lines through that array, I'm going to get a value, a single value in line. In other words, the first time I'm going to get this value. The second time line is going to equal this value. The third time line is going to equal this value. So let's print that out and see what happens. Make sure I save. I'm going to run it again. And you can see exactly that's what happened. So the console printed out C# for beginners, and then it saw that new line character. So it printed that. And then intro to programming with the new line character, printed that, and so forth. So now we're reading lines in. We know that we can read, we can write our text line book by book. The lines that we ran in, we can write book by book. All right, fantastic. So let's see, what else can we do? I can show you this. Maybe I don't want all this spacing between my books. So after line, which is just a single element, and it actually ends up being a string, doesn't it? I can use this rstrip. And what rstrip says is any non-printing characters on the right of my string, get rid of them. Strip off any, and what's our non-printing? Well, our non-visual, I don't want to say non-printing because it is printing, but our characters that are not normal strings. Like this is more of a command to the console rather than an actual string. So strip any of those off, and we have one. If we'd had a \T for tab, that would be stripped off. So any of these, anything on the right-hand side of our string that is not a normal character that prints, strip it off. So let's just see if that works. There's a lot of talk. Let's just see if it works. So save that and run it. And sure enough, it stripped off those non-breaking, the print returns, the break returns that we put at the end of our new line characters. That's the word I'm looking for. Our new line characters, that's the end of our string. Fantastic. So is this rstrip actually changing what's in my array? I don't know. Let's see. So at the end of, after we're all done and we've done all of our rstrips, let's see if it actually made the change. Print lines again. Lines. Okay, so let's print out the array after we're all done printing it and see if rstrip changed our array. My suspect is it didn't. And there you go. So when we printed it, we just said, go ahead and strip that off, that end of the line, and then print that. But it doesn't actually change the array. So those \ns are still in our array. Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to comment that out. So now we've got a good demonstration of reading text into our Python file. So we could do whatever we wanted with it. Whether we need to display it to our users, maybe this would create a menu system for us. Maybe this is These are the books we have available in our bookstore, for example. All right, so now let's see the opposite and print whatever we read to a new text file. All right, so we've read in, there's the I of our input output. So let's output. It's always a good idea when you are finished, and I should have done this earlier, but whenever you're finished with your file, in other words, I read in from this file, I read everything in, I'm really done with this file at this point. I've got what I need, I've got the data that I need, and I've put it into a variable. I don't need to hold on to that file anymore. I'm all done with it. So it's always good programming practice to close it, just to close it out. In other words, the connection that I have, think of it like a string between my program and this other file. So I'm all done using it. I've pulled out the data that I need from it. I really don't need to keep that string attached anymore. That's if I open up more files and close files, and if I open up more files and write more files, and I've got all these strings attached, it gets kind of, you know, could get tangled up. It's kind of a bad analogy, but the idea is we want to take care of our resources. In other words, that string represents memory. Or a stream of memory that the Python file is using to hook itself up to other files. And so it's good practice to clean house, close up those files when you're done using it. That's a long-winded speech just to say, hey, close your files when you're done using it. All right, so now let's do the opposite. Let's write our lines to a new file. So we're going to create a new file. Let's do a write file. And we need to open that file just like we did the last time. We need to make a new string, create a connection to a new file. And we're going to call this bookout.txt because we're going to write data to this file. And this time, instead of the R, I'm going to use W, which says write to a file. Now this particular W will not take the time to look to see if there's already a text file there called book.out and gently look to see, hey, it's already there. Do you want to overwrite? It's not that polite. It's simply going to, if there's one there, it's just going to obliterate it and make a new one. So be careful with this W to make sure that there's not a file you already have there that you might want to save or maintain. The W is just going to obliterate whatever's there and create a new one. It's not going to politely look to see if one already exists and warn you ahead of time. In this case, I don't care. It just makes it easy to do what it is we need to do. So now that I have a object, we call it an object, a write file object, I have a hold of that book.out, I can write to it. So I'm going to use write file equals, sorry, not equals, just write. I'm going to write the lines that are in just lines. So just go ahead and write all the lines. So not one line, but all the lines that you find in lines. Just write it all out. And let's see that work. How do I know I can, oh, I know how to do it. Okay, so we're just going to save it and run it. And let's see what happens. I didn't get too much here, but I can see that, oh, look, there was a file that was written into this folder, and I'm going to look at it. And it says C# for beginners. Well, that's fantastic. This is my bookout.txt. Well, how do I know that? Let me just demonstrate that W, the fact that I told you that W is going to just overwrite and obliterate. So let's say that, well, let's see, let me clear out this screen just so I have a fresh, okay, so now it looks fresh. So we're going to, let's see, we're writing out our lines to our file. Let's just do a write file, and we're just going to write a single string. What shall we name our book? Programming for Dummies. There we go. So now if we run program for dummies, let's see what happens. So I'm going to run the file. It outputs the things to my console, but let's look at our bookout.txt. And now we can see, oh, but wait, programming for dummies got in the same line as C# for beginners. Well, that's a little bit hard to read and not super the way I wanted it to look, so we can always add that new line character at the end. And so now let's run that again, and if we look at our program book.out.txt, you can see that that new line character was input, and now we have our files, our books. So we've demonstrated here the ability for us to read data in from a text file. And then we make sure that we close the resource. So I probably should do what I say and close this resource here. Okay. And then just good programming practice. And then we saw that by reading in those lines by using read lines, everything got read into our lines, which turned into an array, including the, here we loop through all the lines of the array, but we also noticed that those lines returned or printed out the new line character. So we use this rstrip method to print out each line, removing that new line character, so that way we didn't have such a huge space between our books. And then this is where we wrote data to a file. We noticed that if we use W, it overwrites the current file, so it doesn't take the time to politely check and make sure one already exists. It just overwrites one that might already be there or creates a new one if it didn't find one. And then we wrote a single string out, and we also wrote out all of the lines that was in our array. So that's an introduction to file, input, output.